Hi, I'm Roxanna Grunenwald, and I greatly appreciate your patience here today. I'm actually going to stand over on this side, so I'm not directly in my presentation here, but we're going to be talking today about 1 in 100 and what it means to be chasing the top 1% for many of our lives. So the top 1%, 1 in 100, we can maybe start with the baseline definition here, where from an annual income perspective, this is roughly about $700,000 per year here in the US, so it's like neurosurgeon territory here. But from maybe more in a high school, more local level, we can think of this as 1 in 100 people are National Merit Scholarship recipients. They're maybe a Rhodes Scholarship here in uni or post-uni. Maybe they're accepted here into the most prestigious elite Y Combinator sort of accelerator. That's also about 1 in 100. And 1 in 100 is also making Forbes 30 under 30 for good or for worse. Yet, 1 in 100 also applies to those with congenital heart defects, which impacts about 40,000 births per year here in the US, as well as active epilepsy, where there's about 2.9, nearly 3 million American adults in total that have active epilepsy, as well as celiac disease, a very severe gluten intolerance, as well as vitiligo, where the immune system impacts and kills the melanin-producing cells in the skin, as well as rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, and many of the other autoimmune conditions. And so, if we're looking here at Foothill High, there's about 2.2 thousand students here at Foothill, and so 1 in 100 in this case is about 22 students. Interestingly enough, that means that there's about 22 students that will be a National Merit semifinalist. You'll be in Rhodes, you'll be in YC, you'll make maybe Forbes 30 under 30, and many of you, 22 of you, might be earning over $700,000 a year, and you can all have your Lambos. That sounds like a pretty great life. Also, about 22 of you might be more on the right side of this column with congenital heart defects, active epilepsy, celiac disease, vitiligo, rheumatoid arthritis, IBD, and many other autoimmune conditions. Now, when 1% means excellence, we congratulate and we applaud. But when 1% means illness, we tend to act with pity and shame. We call it rare. We say, I'm really sorry to hear that. That must be really hard in your life. And then we go quiet. So of the Foothill High, about 22 students, you're all chasing these excellence categories, as was I. Many of us who spent our whole lives shaping the top 1% in excellence. Yet many may fall into the right side of the category too, the 1%, 1 in 100 of illness patients, just like me. Less than 2 years ago, I found myself, firstly, in the top of the world. I was at Yale, I'm from a super small town, left that, now go to a great school and study engineering, had an amazing group of friends, have had the opportunity to work with numerous different startups, and then increasing with different funds. I was at the United Nations in New York giving presentations. It was amazing, it was the time of my life. And yet through it all, I was bleeding internally, and it got progressively more and more severe to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. Yet I was 20 and you think, wow, I've been healthy my whole life, surely it's just a fluke, nothing could possibly be wrong, bad things don't happen to good people. Something like this would never happen to me, right? Wrong. I ended up progressively bleeding to the point where I was in airplane medical emergency. I needed oxygen tanks and 2 on the airplane. I was escorted off by paramedics in the ambulance, in the ER. Got to check a whole bunch of things off the bucket list, right? It felt very like main character energy moment, mind you. I remember my resting heart rate being 150 BPM at rest, over twice what that should be for a healthy, normal functioning human at rest. And ended up needing multiple different blood transfusions, iron infusions, steroids, intravenous antibiotics at a very severe abdominal infection. Was in not 1 but 2 hospitals, and they thought I had sepsis, which can be very fatal and life-threatening. I didn't have sepsis. They thought I had meningitis. I didn't have meningitis, and they struggled to kind of diagnose what exactly the issue was. And it turns out I too had one of the 1 in 100, a top 1% of a health ailment. For me, that was IBD, inflammatory bowel disease. And I never thought it would happen to someone like me. I wasn't able to eat for about 5 weeks, and so my body started to metabolize my own muscles for protein stores, and I went from being a runner to being in a wheelchair in about a month. But slowly and surely, things got a little bit better, and I was able to eat again. All the treatments worked. The steroids were very harsh, but they worked, and we were able to prevail. And now here I am, nearly 2 years later, and I finally found the right medication, which I'm very grateful for. I have great doctors and a whole great healthcare system that's by my side, and every single day I'm incredibly thankful for this. Right now, I fly to Boston every 2 weeks from the West Coast, make this cross-country trek to receive my health infusion, which is a humanized monoclonal antibody infusion intravenously every 8 weeks, so every 2 months, about 6 times a year. They're also $25,000 6 times a year, so that's a whole separate thing. But for all main intents and purposes, I feel pretty great. Everything is fairly good in my life and with my health. I, too, was chasing this top 1% of excellence, all these categories that you see here on the left side of the screen, but I ended up falling into the right side. And then I realized that I had this top 1% all along. Hi, I'm Roxanna Grunenwald. I go to Yale, I study chemical engineering. I have worked with numerous different startups and then transitioned more into early stage investing with venture capital. I've worked with our tech transfer office at Yale Ventures, as well as numerous funds, including X Fund, Pear VC, and now I'm a partner with Dormroom Fund, where I primarily invest in the bio platforms, climate, hard tech, so deep tech, hardware, and applied AI companies, all from students. I think students can do some pretty incredible things, but a lot of students can also have some pretty incredible backstories that we may not all see obviously on the outside, many invisible stories and invisible illnesses. In Dormroom Fund, we invest into very few companies, and so maybe what's 1 in 100 companies. We turn away 99 and maybe we say 1. And for this one, it sounds like 1 in 100 is a pretty big deal then. But over the course of my life, I realized that 1 in 100 might not actually be that rare. And we're talking about 1%. What about the 50% of women that exist? Like, surely that's not that rare either. There are over 80 autoimmune conditions, and so that means about 25.3 to 23.5 to about 50 million Americans are impacted total. There's a lot of gross underestimation of the number of diagnoses each year, and one autoimmune condition can unlock others, where you can have 2 or 3 or 4 over the course of a lifetime. And 80% of these occur in women. 80. It's a far cry from the 50 that we might expect. IBD, my condition, inflammatory bowel disease, impacts 1 in 100, as do many other of these conditions. This includes both Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. For Crohn's, about 50 to 80% require surgery over a lifetime, whereas for mine, ulcerative colitis, it's about 10 to 30 that require some surgical intervention. And it's a really big deal. In fact, 90% of the $4.9 trillion US annual healthcare spend goes toward chronic disease management. And it's projected that the market will reach about $117 billion by 2032 for autoimmune therapies. In fact, we've had a couple of women's health companies, such as Maven and Flow, that have reached unicorn status, over $1 billion in valuation, touching certain aspects of this value chain, yet missing out on many aspects of what it means to live a life with a chronic disease. These top 1%, these 1 in 100 categories here on the left, this excellence category, these are all lifetime memberships. You're a YC alum, you're a Rhodes alum, you're a National Merit alum. But what about the lifetime membership for chronic disease? What about women's health? 80% of these autoimmune conditions occur in females, and the average diagnosis age is 15 through 35, which is during the most fertile reproductive years for the vast majority of women. This impacts everything from menstruation, conception, breastfeeding, birth, menopause, everything in the infant's life. And this top 1% is a lived reality that impacts the entire life beyond a one-time thing. So how do you plan for a lifetime of autoimmunity? And how do you plan for what happens next? I remember being 20 years old and my doctors sat me down and they're like, Roxanna, here's what you need to know if you ever want to become pregnant someday. X, Y, Z, all these issues, but you should be aware now. I'm thinking here, oh, whoa, I just got my blood transfusion an hour ago, this is not the time, I'm super far away from this, why are we talking about it? But now 2 years later, I'm still far away from pregnancy, but I understand why they sat me down and they started telling me all these things that day. In fact, pregnancy is a really big deal. A lot of people think that the immune suppressors with an autoimmune condition means that you're actually doing really well under pregnancy, and that pregnancy also is a base level immune suppression so that you can be kind of in remission when you're pregnant, even if your disease is otherwise not well managed. But actually, it's a lot more nuanced. So pregnancy is more of an immune orchestration, and for the embryo, the egg, to be implanted into the uterine wall requires a degree of inflammation. So you need some inflammation. You also need a bit of tolerance so that the tissue can remodel and you can actually carry the egg and baby to full term. And so the thought is, okay, well, if I'm pregnant, then I'm not drinking, I'm not doing drugs, I'm not even sitting in a hot tub for 10 minutes or really ever at all. So probably taking your medications is a bad thing, and taking fewer medications could lead to a safer pregnancy. My doctors 2 years ago sat me down and they said, no, that's not true. And actually, the best case scenario is a really well-managed disease. Yet biologics, the therapy that I am on, and therapy that many individuals are on, do cross the placenta and can be detected into infants 1 to 6 months after birth. And that's really scary, because if I think about my story and how deeply impacted my health was, and I think about how severe and how hardworking my medications must be to keep me alive and healthy, what does this mean for some unborn child? This is concern that the infant will not be able to have an acquired immune system, and they'll be born with a base level immune suppressant and then will perish from rhinovirus or the common cold or anything because they don't have the ability to fight off diseases. So there's an interesting study, the PNO registry. PNO stands for Pregnancy and IBD Neonatal Outcomes, and they followed a number of different cases. Actually, have been across numerous different peer-reviewed studies, and then together there's this conglomerate of the registry. They looked at different categories, some that were on immune modulators and small molecules, some that weren't on either, some that were on one or not the other, some on corticosteroids and other types of therapeutics. And it's really interesting what they found. I'm going to first start with this graph here, where you can see on the left in the green bar, you can see the drug levels in the mom. And then you can see, interestingly, in the blue bar here in the middle, the amount of the drug that has crossed the placenta into the infant. And the higher this bar is, the more of the drug is in the baby. And so you want this to be lower. You can see actually this yellow is the ratio of infant to mom. And so the lower the yellow bar, the better. With the exception of this third medication that does not actually cross the placenta, but the vast majority of them do. So we know for a fact that these medications are crossing. Now, further data here shows that we're roughly like 60-40 split between Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. You see a whole spread of different medications, all the way through biologics, even the corticosteroids, that all impact different pathways in the cytokine signaling process for inflammation. Interestingly enough, from a conclusion standpoint, a lot of surprising things happen, where basically, despite the fact that these biologics and these really heavy-hitting therapeutics are crossing into the infant, you don't really see anything bad happening. There's no increase in birth defects or preterm birth or lower birth weight or NICU admittance or developmental or brain developmental milestones. None of that's happening. The infant is fully able to have an immune response to influenza and tetanus and different vaccines. The infant is no more likely to be sick at daycare. There's actually a number of positive things that happen. Birth development is as good, if not better, than others that are not impacted by these conditions without the moms that are on biologics, with the exception of steroids that have a slightly higher miscarriage rate and slightly higher risk of some of the other birth deformities and issues. For the most part, things are pretty good. So it's interesting that there's no increase in any of the quote-unquote bad things. And this gave me a lot of hope. Maybe the top 1% of disease isn't really so bad after all. I thought that the top 1% meant elite, and then I became a medical top 1%, where chronic disease gave me a lifetime membership to a club that I never even wanted in the first place. And even though I'm 22 and I stand here today and I'm nowhere near pregnancy, but with chronic illness, the future tends to arrive early. Lifetime membership means that these big questions pop up years before you expected them to. But now, I'm not afraid. For so long, I was chasing this top 1%. And I thought that I got it. I got into Yale, it's great. But then I was hospitalized and I was diagnosed with something that I thought would change my life. I thought my life was over. I thought that I had fallen from the top 1%. But then I realized this top 1% membership meant that I could do more good in the world. More doors were opening, more lanes through which I could make positive impact and bring more smiles to more people's faces, do more good and inspire people with hope. A few weeks ago, I went to a fundraiser walk here at East Bay for IBD, for my condition, where we celebrated hundreds of different people across 3 or 4 generations that have been in some way, shape, or form impacted by my disease. We wrote what we were hoping for. My hope is to be able to dream with IBD. And I dreamed of being a founder to raise a startup. I dreamed of being a mother to raise a family. And I thought that my disease prohibited both. But I was wrong. You don't need to be in the top 1% of excellence to do top 1% things. And that your story, I realized, is a top 1% story too. Thank you.